Hello, people of outside. My name is Al. For the application process, you guys have asked for essentially a document explaining how to do something at which I consider myself an expert. So today I've chosen to show you guys a woodworking technique. Namely, we're going to do a bridal joint. I've been making furniture professionally for a number of years now. Expert is sort of a relative term, I think. This is a craft that you can spend a lifetime honing, perfecting skills and adding skills to your toolbox. So, there are people who've been doing this much longer than I've been alive. So I use the term expert loosely, but it is something that I take quite seriously. It's something that I strive to improve at, and so. So I'm going to show you how to do a bridal joint. And essentially a bridal joint is a type of mortise and tenon, which really just means it's a hole and a peg that goes in the hole. You can see this, so this is a bridal joint here. You can see this is sort of a tight-fitting joint. It adds a lot of strength. You get a lot of glue surfaces. You get either side of the tenon here. You get the floor of the mortise and the cheeks of the tenon. So lots of gluing surface, which makes for a really strong joint. And you also get some mechanical strength just from the joint, by the way the joint fits together. It adds a bit of strength as well. You can see it's a really beautiful joint, I think. I'm not sure if you can make out, but you get some really nice end grains sticking through. It's a really subtle, simple, beautiful way to join two boards together. It's been used for hundreds of years in furniture. It's used for timber framing, so if you're, traditional means for building houses. So today I'll show you guys how to cut this joint in the method that I think is really easy, which is on the bandsaw. So the bandsaw is a tool that a lot of hobbyists have. Every professional shop will have one. It's a versatile tool. They can be come by inexpensively. So knowing how to do this joint on a bandsaw, I think, is a real asset for beginners and professionals alike. So first we're going to go to the bandsaw, and I'm going to show you how to set it up to cut the mortise, so essentially the hole. And then once that's done, we'll make a few adjustments and we'll cut the tenon. And then you will know how to make a bridal joint. All right. Okay, so here we are at the bandsaw. Like I said, we're going to start by cutting out the mortise, or the slot, right through the center of the board. So yeah, to do so, there are going to be two different variables we need to consider when we set our saw up for that cut. The first variable is going to be how wide is that slot that we're cutting in the center. Generally with a bridal joint like this, I like to cut it in thirds, essentially have the slot be the middle third and then have a third of the board on either side of the hole. So yeah, I'm going to show you how we would set that up. So what we'll do is we're going to kind of move our fence. You can see this moves in this lateral direction until the blade is about 2/3 of the way into the board. That is, we have 2/3 of the board roughly to the left and 1/3 of the board to the right. And you'll notice here, I've said roughly, and you'll notice that throughout this video you're not going to see me use a tape measure or a ruler, that we can do this entire process without really measuring anything. That's one of the really beautiful things about this joint, using this process. When you measure, there's just tons of opportunity to, if you strike your pencil line wrong, there's just a lot of opportunity for error. And doing it this way means that you've just greatly reduced that opportunity for user error. So I've got my blade set up with 2/3 to the left of the blade. And what I'm going to do when I cut is I'll cut, then I'll flip the board over, and I'll cut again. And that has guaranteed me that I'm cutting out a slot that's perfectly centered in the board. That's roughly the middle third of the board. The other variable that we want to consider when we're setting up for this cut is the depth of cut that we're making. That is, how far essentially are we plunging this blade into this board, how deep. What we're shooting for is to cut it exactly the width of this board. So you can see I've drawn a line here just to illustrate, but when we put the joint together, we want this to be flush on top. So we want to cut essentially in this direction until that line. There are a couple ways to do this. One would be to draw the line and to cut, but that introduces a lot of opportunity for error. First we'd have to draw the line on both sides because we're flipping the board, and there's it would be easy to draw those lines not exactly in the same spot. And then just in cutting, it'd be easy to not quite make it to the line, or to go a little too far. And
And so, as I said before, the idea here is to reduce the possibility of error. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to clamp a stop on the back here. And what that means is we'll clamp a piece of wood. I've got a little piece of plywood ready. We'll clamp a piece of wood behind the blade so that as we're cutting, we'll actually bump up against that wood, and that will set the depth. The beauty of this is it makes every cut exactly the same. So if we were making 10 of these joints, if we're making a set of chairs, for instance, we would know that every single joint that we cut is going to be identical. And it'll also make the process really quick because we just put the board in, slide till it hits, and then repeat the process. So next I'm going to show you how we'll actually set up that stop block and get the depth correct. Okay, so now I'm going to set up that stop block, like I said, to help us get the depth of this cut correct. To do so, first I'm going to take this piece, one of the boards from our joint, I'm going to slide it until it's just touching the very front of the blade. So just slide it along the fence until it touches the front of the blade. Next I'm going to take my stop block, which in this case I'm using some plywood. I know that I've got a nice square cut on this. I'm going to push it against my fence. Then I'm going to take the other piece of my stock for the joint and put it against my stop block. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide my stop block against the fence until the two pieces of wood just barely touch. You want to be careful not to bump the one that's up against the blade. It's easy to do. If you do, you just kind of start over. So now, I don't know if you can tell from the video, but I've essentially got this piece of wood. I've slid the stop block till this piece of wood is exactly touching the other one. I'm going to make sure that one is still against the blade. And now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take one clamp and I'm going to secure my stop block to the table. And I'll show you why I'm just using one clamp here in one sec. Essentially now, I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to kind of reset this against the front of the blade. And I'm going to slide in the stock just to see if I've got it exactly where I want it. And now I can see a little bit of a gap there, as though my stop block needs to move in this direction just a little bit. Because I only have one clamp, I can just kind of give my stop block a little bit of a tap with a mallet. And just to make a really fine adjustment. Now I'll repeat the process. Okay, now I feel like I've got it exactly where I want it. And just to show you what we've done here, we've set up the stop block using our stock so that as we make this cut, the wood will go exactly the width of our stock, which is what we, in that last little clip I had said was our goal. So now essentially I've got this block behind the blade that's going to stop my cut every time. So now I've got the width set, which we did first by setting the fence, and I've got the depth set by having the stop block in place. Because it's right where I want it, I'm just going to add a second clamp. Things happen, things get bumped, and I don't want to lose that setting. It'll just make my life easier if I've got it firmly in place. Okay, that's all we need to do. So now I'm going to... Okay, so we've made our first two cuts. We've got, this is going to be our slot. The hurdle here now is removing this material from between our cuts. The best way, in my opinion, to do this, it's kind of a primitive way to do it, but I think it's efficient and it guarantees the best results. And again, it minimizes the chance for error, is to simply take my board, and I still have my stop in place, and I'm just going to kind of chew out a bit of the wood from between my two cuts. I'm just going to kind of, you'll see, I'll just plunge the board down, and I know that I'm going to get the same depth on every cut because of that stop. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now you can see I've used that saw setup to essentially chew out as much of the material as I could, as much of the stock we have to remove as I could. Now I'm just going to go ahead and use a regular coping saw and just take out as much as I can. I want to be really careful not to cut. This is, kind of the floor of that mortise. I don't want to go cut down into that because that'll show. So I'm really just trying to remove the material. And I can actually give myself some leeway. I'll cut above that and leave just some little stubs, essentially, of these little bits of material remaining. And then we'll clean up the bottom of that cut lastly on the saw. So I'll just kind of slide my coping saw in and start to remove. You can see how easily they come off because I've cut them so thin. I'll just start to remove. I just want to be careful in this last one that you don't cut into the shoulder too much because that would become visible. But essentially just use the saw here to remove some of that material from the center. So we're back at the bandsaw now. All that remains on this piece is to clean up the floor of the joint. I don't know if you can really see with the video, but I've taken out most of the material, but there's still some stumps, so to speak, of the material in there. The bottom here is not nice and flat and square. What I'm going to do is, because I've left my saw exactly set up, I can just slide it in the piece until I hit that stop, and then I can essentially use the blade almost like a grinder. I can kind of move left and right because there's very little material left that allows me to do that. And what I'll do is I'll slide in against the fence, and that'll keep me from cutting into this side of the board. And then I'll kind of move towards the center of that mortise, and then I'm actually going to flip over and do the same thing. That way, if I just do it from one side, let's say I just go in and I try to go all the way across, I could hit this side and nick it, and that, you know, any errant cut in this is going to show when I put the joint together. So I'll just kind of go up against my stop, slide across, flip over, and do the same to about the halfway point. That's going to give me a perfectly square, smooth cut floor, bottom part of this mortise. So I'm going to do that real quick now. Okay, we finished cutting our mortise. We have a nice square and flat floor. Center third is cut out. Now what remains to be done is for us to cut the tenon. You'll notice the way we set things up when we cut our mortise, that this wall, the face of this inside wall, is exactly lined up with the outside of these teeth, since we cut it like this. So again, this surface is exactly where the outside of these teeth lie. When we cut the tenon, the wall of our tenon, which will be here, is actually going to be on the inside face of these teeth. So if we just cut it with this exact same setup, we're going to end up with a tenon that is too skinny for so a peg that's too skinny for the hole. So what we need to do is we need to make up for the width of this blade by moving the fence. So to do so, we're going to take our mortise stock that we just cut, put it against the fence, and what we want to do is we want to move it so that the inside of the blade is lined up with this face. Now actually what I want to do is, I actually want to move it a little beyond that point, just slightly, so that the blade, the inside face of this face of these teeth, lies just beyond this face. That is just a little bit to the right from this perspective of that face. What that does is it's going to cut the tenon a little too big, and I always like to, when I'm cutting joinery, I cut it a little bit tight. The reason for that is you can always subtract wood, but you can never add it back, so it's good to cut things a little tight and then sneak up on a good fit. If you cut it a little too loose, you know, you're in trouble. You can't go back from there. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm putting the wood against the fence, sliding it in, and making it so that the teeth lie ever so slightly, the inside edge of the teeth ever so slightly to the right of this face, so outside of this face, so to speak. So I've got that set up now. And I'm going to go ahead, I can leave my stop block where I want because that's exactly the width, the depth that I need. So now I've got my two variables set. I'm going to go ahead and make that cut. So now we've got the tenon cuts done. You can see the two cuts we just made. Now what I'd like to do is fine tune the fit of the tenon. But as you can see, because the waist is in the way, I can't actually check the fit of this tenon yet. So I'm going to leave the saw setup exactly how it is because I want to use that to fine tune if I need to, these cuts. But I'm going to turn the stock and just run it into the saw this way and remove the little bit of waste. I'm not actually going all the way to the end of the line, not doing my final cut. I'm just removing enough of the waste to expose some of the tenon so I can check the fit. So I'm going to go ahead and make that cut now. Okay, I've gone ahead and I've removed some stock from either side of the tenon. Now I can actually check the fit. So as I expected and sort of what we were hoping for, the tenon is a little bit too big. It doesn't quite fit. I can get it in there, but it's too tight a fit. So what I'm going to do now is I need to kind of shave a little off of the tenon so that it will fit. It'll fit better. One way I could do this is I could I could loosen my fence and move my fence towards the blade, so that I actually, when I cut next time, right now the blade is right against the face of this tenon, because we just made the cut. So I could actually move it like in this direction to take a little more off. The problem with loosening the fence is then I lose my reference point. It'd be very easy to move the fence too much. I cut off too much of the tenon. It becomes sort of a trial and error situation. Instead of doing that, I'm going to take this. This is just some regular paper I keep around the shop. And I'm going to put it between the stock and the fence So you can see what that does is it moves my stock the width of the paper away from the fence. So now if I make this cut, I'm going to remove a paper width from this tenon, if that makes sense. And that is going to allow me to sneak up on the fit. If it's a little bit too tight still, I can add a second piece of paper, and what I'll do is I'll actually flip over the stock. The reason for that is if I just continue to add paper, and I start to move the stock this way and cut, suddenly my tenon is no longer centered on my board. And it'll make the fit a little bit off. So if I'll make this cut on this side. If I need a second piece of paper, I'll flip over the board, add the second piece, run it again. And that allows me each time to take the width of a piece of paper off of this tenon so I can really fine tune the fit and get it exactly where I want it to be. Alright, so now I have made 2 passes using paper. I did a single pass with 1 piece of paper, flipped over the board. I actually just folded the paper in half to get double the width, made a second pass, and that got my fit perfectly dialed. It takes a little bit of force to get it together, but I don't need to hammer it together or anything like that. That's kind of the ideal fit. So there it is. Now all that remains to be done, I have these little bits of extra stock. To get rid of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this fence to the distance that I need so I can cut right to the line. And to do that, I'm actually just going to, again, use the other stock. I need to cut exactly this width to get that where I need it to be. You can kind of see how that would be illustrated like this. I need to cut exactly that width to remove those little bits of waste. To get that set, I'll just throw my stock, push it right up against the fence, adjust my fence until the outside teeth, this side of the teeth, are lined up perfectly with this side of the stock. And then again, that will remove just enough of this waste so the outside of these teeth are the exact width of this stock. So just double check that setting real quick. You can see I still have my stop block in place. It's not actually doing anything on this cut. I just haven't moved it away. So yeah, I've got this set up so the outside of the teeth are right with the outside of the stock. One last thing, well, actually involving the stop block. I'm going to use it. You can see if I were to try to make this cut right now, I'm going to slide into the saw. I have really very little against the fence, so there's nothing keeping this nice and straight. I'm going to go ahead, unclamp my stop block since I don't need it anymore for that dimension. Now I can push this stop block right up against the fence. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. Let's see. So now I've got the stop block against the fence, and I can use that as a push, and that'll make sure that this stock stays nice and square to the fence when I make this cut. So I've gone ahead and made those last 2 cuts that we talked about at the bandsaw. I took off the waste on either side of the tenon here, and now, finally, we have a completed joint. To anyone who has stuck around this long, thank you for your patience. So yeah, you can see it takes a little bit of force to get it together, which is exactly what we want. You don't want it so tight that you need to hammer it together. You have a hard time getting it apart if you need to before you do your final fit and all that. So just a nice tight fitting joint. You can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but we have a nice gap-free joint here. A little end grain showing there. You get the inverse pattern on the other side, which is really nice. So yeah, a little glue on all the surfaces, a clamp, and you've got a joint that will last forever. Really robust, strong joint that I think looks nice as well. So thanks for sticking it out, and thank you for your time, and I appreciate your consideration for the position.